Thank you so much, Professor Bloxham, for this thought-provoking talk, this wide framing of the question of genocide and mass violence. I'm sure there are many questions here. But first, before moving to our commentators, I see that many people would like the air conditioner to be... but where is the remote control? Who has the control?
1 degree, also, maybe 2.
No, because I see I was getting a lot of communications. Is it your watch? Oh, okay. I thought it was a souvenir, but you know. Okay. What I will do now is actually introduce both of our commentators, and then after their comments, we'll open the floor for a discussion. Our first commentator is Professor Daniel Blatman, who's the Max and Rita Haber Professor of Contemporary Jewry and Holocaust Studies at the Hebrew University. He is the former director of the Center of Study of History of Culture and Polish Jewry and the Avraham Arman Institute of Contemporary Jewry. He published many articles and books about the history of Polish Jewry in the 20th century, about the labor movement in Eastern Europe, and about the Holocaust and its aftermath. I'll mention only a few of them. For Our Freedom and Yours, the Jewish Labor Bund in Poland, 1939 till 1945. Reportage from the Ghetto, the Jewish Underground Press in the Warsaw Ghetto, and the Death Marches, the final phase of the Nazi genocide, which has been translated to a number of languages. He's the winner of the Jacob Bachman Memorial Prize and the Yad Vashem International Prize in Holocaust Studies. His current research project is genocidal deportation of 20th century genocide and mass violence. I'll introduce also our second speaker, Dr. Chavi Dreyfus, who is a historian of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. She's a senior lecturer here at Tel Aviv University at the Department of Jewish History, and heads the Center for Research of Holocaust and History of Poland in Yad Vashem. Her book entitled We Polish Jews? ? And Professor Blatman, please.
Thank you. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Donald just said to me before his lecture that he will be satisfied with one sentence comment, which is more or less, it was great, thank you. But allow me to add a few more sentences to what we have just heard. Coming from a different perspective that Donald presented to you now, mainly I'm a Holocaust scholar. I was trained as a Holocaust scholar, although I'm trying recently to add few additional aspects to what I've been doing before in my career. I would like to probably touch 2 or 3 points that I think that probably might be even a fruitful base for future discussion after we will hear Javi's comments. I think that Donald Bloxham, first of Donald offers a very interesting and to sometimes even sophisticated, what I call an integrative approach to explain the Holocaust within a major perspective than we usually do in Holocaust studies. A while ago, I published an article which one of its subtitle called the current era of Holocaust scholarship, a post-uniqueness era. I think Donald is one of the major contributors to what we might call a post-uniqueness era, something that around the world is probably more common and understood in a way than our research, Holocaust research here in Israel. This contextualization, I think, that Donald offers is based mainly on three bases. The first is the spatial contextualization, which I think in his written text that we read, he called it a realm of violence, or space of violence. This space of violence is pretty much familiar now due to Tim Snyder's Bloodlands, of course. But I think that what Donald suggests is a much more, I would say, not only solid, but much more comprehensive and enlightened in a way approach than Bloodlands offers. Because as we heard, Bloxham suggested that this realm, this space of violence, should be understood as a kind of a frame. And within that frame, we have to understand two major factors that create the outcome. And these two major factors is, first of all, the ethnopolitics, then the geopolitics, and then the outcome, which is the politics, which basically is the genocidal act. So within this perspective, we can, of course, in a way, place or understand or cover this geographical perspective that he offers us, included, of course, the Holocaust, as well as other forms of genocide, mass violence, which took place in the 20th century in the European continent. I would add some fourth component, I would say, which Bloxham did not touch, and I think should be added to his analysis, which is the time, or more than time, the encounter between the time and the geopolitics and the outcome, which was, of course, the genocide act. The encounter between time and space, which goes from mid-19th century, let's say, until the Holocaust, the mid-19th century. Some scholars even dealing with the post-Holocaust period, which contains other forms of genocide. I think it's a major fact to understand the development of Holocaust within its within the process that it takes place, and this encounter in a way create a formula that combines ideology, ethnopolitics, as Donald suggested, demographic and social engineering, for instance, which is very important in some cases of genocide. Economic, all kind of economic calculation, nation building process, which to some extent exists in this case or another, and if we'll be able to emerge this time perspective, I think we can understand more of the overall process of genocide, of the 20th century genocide, mainly in Europe. The second point is that I would like to touch is the question of victims, which Donald hardly touches, as a matter of fact, in his presentation. Probably, I'm not saying that he doesn't deal with the victims in other books or articles or research that he has done on the topic. But anyways, if we try to understand the genocide from this perspective of the violence against minorities, within the frame that Donald offers, we are talking about victims. The victims were Muslims, Christians, and Jews, obviously. The Muslims were victimized by Tsarist Russia, of course. And the perpetrator were Christian Orthodox perpetrators in the 19th century mainly. The seconds, Christians, were mainly victimized by the Ottoman Empire in the 20th century, the Armenian and the Greeks and other minorities, Christian minorities, and the Muslims were the perpetrators, in a way. And the third perpetrator, the third group, the Jews, were of course victimized mainly by the Germans, or the Nazi regime, which was in a way could be identified as anti-Christian perpetrators. So I think this creates something from the perspective, from the victims' perspective of from the victims' perspective, which to some extent is different from the other cases of genocide, which mainly Donald was dealing with. That doesn't make it unique, but that, at least from the perspective of the victims, I think we have to understand it more precisely. The third and probably the last point, if I have some time, I'll touch another one. I think that Donald said, said about himself, I'm not regarding myself anymore as a scholar of comparative genocide or something like that. Yeah. I think it's to some extent it's a welcome approach. Although I still believe that comparison is very is a kind of a helpful tool to understand genocide, because generally speaking, I think that more or less, if we looked upon the development in Holocaust and genocide studies, we have two criteria in order that were suggested by scholars to understand this over the whole topic. One is the differentiation between Holocaust and other cases of genocide, which is of course very common, I would say, debate. And the second approach is what considered to be genocide and against what is not genocide, other forms of mass violence or ethnic cleansing or whatever, but still not. And this is something that it's maybe it's very important for the international courts or other forms of justice. But my question is whether or how much the historian can use this perspective in order to understand what's similar and what's different between different cases of mass murder or mass violence. Because if you follow the literature on genocide, there are so many definitions for what is genocide, and I'll just give you a few examples. That retributive genocide, institutional genocide, utilitarian genocide, monopolistic genocide, ideological genocide, cultural genocide, developmental genocide, latent genocide, and even optimal genocide. I don't know how many of you can understand the difference between the two. All these definitions. I myself find it very confusing. But I think that Donald suggests or offers something that try to at least to make these things much more easier, kind of a scheme that understand these differences much more easier than all these definitions that lead probably to some extent to nowhere. The last point, I still have some 2 minutes, so the last point I would like to touch, how can I don't do that, the Jewish perspective. I more or less accept Donald's direction to explain the Holocaust from what he calls the German perspective and the European perspective. But I think that going deeper into the European, what he calls the European context or perspective of the Holocaust, which mainly focuses on all kind of areas or territories or states which are either allies of Germany, either independents, and with some relations that they had with Germany. I think the most impressive case, which you touched very briefly, is Croatia. Not Romania and Hungary, which are dealt very extensively also by Uras, but Croatia is a very interesting example. Because there are many doubts that whether Ante Pavelic, the leader of the Ustaše regime in Croatia, would have paid attention to the Jewish question unless he understood that he could benefit something from that. And benefit, I mean not territorial, not territory, but mainly economical support from Germany. So if we understand this Jewish perspective, he was married to a Jewish lady, as well as some of his leaders, some of other major functionaries of the Ustaše regime. So anti-Semitism as a motive with the Croatia case, if you understand it, is almost not existing, or even I would say a trivial issue. I mean, taking into account that they wanted to integrate within the Croatia state a huge minority of Bosnian Muslims, which to some extent, of course. So I think that with understanding all this complicity and all this multi-faces perspective of the Jewish issue, I think that we probably take some even more. We can benefit more from what Donald offers us with that European context of the Jewish case or the Jewish Holocaust. Oh, okay, so I have to finish here, so I just leave it here.